Hi guys, welcome back to the internet. It's great to see you. If this is the first video you're seeing of me in the new year, Happy New Year. Today I just wanted to talk to you about my 2020 favorite books. It's been a really difficult reading year, you guys. I lost track of what I was reading around when the first lockdown hit, and I just stopped filming. What are they even called? Wow, I can't even remember. Like wrap-ups. Wow, I'm have this fantasy that I'm a booktuber, but clearly I'm not. I can't even remember the word for wrap-ups. I stopped filming wrap-ups about 5 months into the year, and since then I've not really read too much except for as part of my book club, The Reader's Resistance, and that's been amazing. It's been an amazing experience starting that book club and meeting up with some of you every single month to chat about different politically minded books and to have political discussions. And it's been so fascinating hearing about where you're from and what the politics is like in your country and all of that stuff. It's a really international and lovely community that we have over there. So if you want to join, I'll leave links in the description for how to participate in the Reader's Resistance. But basically, besides reading for that, I just haven't really been reading that much. That being said, there are some books that I've never mentioned before that ended up on my 2020 favorites, but I'm not gonna share these in any particular order, and I'm also not gonna show you any of the books physically because, as you might be able to tell, there's a lot of change happening. I'm basically moving quite soon, I hope, and I'm unhauling a lot of my books, and I'm banning myself from buying any new books so I can actually read the books that I'm keeping. So I'm just gonna be like inserting an image of the book. I'm sure you will be fine with that. You're here for the book, not for the show and tell. So here we go. One of my favorite books of the year, which will come as no surprise to anybody, has been The Overstory by Richard Powers. Wow, this book was incredible. Wait, hold on, let me shift so I can insert the book. This book was fantastic. It was literally one of the most profound, existential, philosophical, personal, beautiful, like literary, I want to say romp, but that doesn't feel right. It feels too casual. Like just journey. It was a freaking journey. And it was like probably the longest book that I read this year from this list. And it was fantastic. Like I literally have no bad things to say about it, except that maybe it ends on a bit of a like ellipses, like just ... and you like kind of have to just live with the ambiguity. So that was really a struggle. Like I had a full-on existential crisis at the end of January after finishing that book. That being said, I have not been able to stop thinking about it. I have so much empathy for like trees and animals and different people now having read that book. So I highly recommend. I do not think it will be a disappointment if you pick it up. I almost don't want to tell you the synopsis because it kind of sounds a bit like, why would I read that? But trust me, it is a page-turning book. It is fantastic. I even lent it out to a friend of mine who's currently reading it. So there is like no greater honor than when I give away a book that I own because it's so good. I want it to be in someone else's hands. So yeah, The Overstory. Check it out. It's amazing. The second book that I really loved reading this year was Tiny Beautiful Things by Cheryl. Just thinking about this book reminds me of all of the emotions I felt reading it, the laughter, the tears, the awe in the author. It's a fantastic nonfiction book. It's really readable. Basically, so Cheryl is like an internet agony aunt, which is somebody who gets letters and responds to them in a column. And she had a column called Dear Sugar, and people would send her their problems, various types of problems. They would send her problems if they were having trouble in their romantic relationships, or if they were having trouble in their familiar relationships, or if they were addicted to drugs, or just experienced a massive loss, or were jealous of their coworkers, whatever it is. And and no matter what level of importance it is, Cheryl Strayed addressed the problems with such integrity and honor and joy and pure wisdom. Like, this woman has been through so much, and she often shares her own life experiences that have just been so traumatic, and yet she is just such a kind, compassionate person, and it really comes through in the letters. Like I said, I laughed, I cried, I had a whole cycle of emotions reading this book, and I will definitely be rereading it. I've dog-eared so many of the pages, and I want to like go back through it, because no matter what you're going through, there's going to be something in it for you. Like I said, it's really readable, and it's just a fantastic book. Like, I loved it. It was great. The next book that I read and loved was Your Silence Will Not Protect You by Audre Lorde. This is a essay collection mixed with a poetry collection that is based on her other most famous book, Sister Outsider. And basically, it's a reprint of some of her essays, including uses of the erotic, the master's tools will not dismantle the master's house, uses of anger, and the self-titled essay, Your Silence Will Not Protect You. And honestly, I was so impressed. Like, I'd never read Audre Lorde's nonfiction beyond the like little penguin 1 pound collection that included the master's tools will not dismantle the master's house, and Poetry is Not a Luxury, which is another one of her best essays. And so I'd only read 2 of her essays before, but to read a more diverse collection, to have included some of the poems which honestly didn't really resonate too much, but to just have the perspective of this woman who is an African American living in the, what was it, 60s? She was an academic, she was a lesbian, she was a mom, she was such a freaking revolutionary activist, and one of the first intersectional feminists as well. And it shows, like, she really cares about these issues, obviously, and she really kind of walks you through them in a really accessible way. Her language is super accessible, but really powerful. And just like Cheryl Strayed, she really shares a lot of her personal life throughout the essays and makes so many convincing arguments about like why to take care of yourself as an act of rebellion, as an act of revolution, how to channel your joy and also your anger and help people in your community find their voice and use it and step up, and just all of that energy. It was so great to read at the time when it just felt like the world was falling apart and I didn't know how to respond. And it was one of the books that really encouraged me to start the book club and to make more of an effort to diversify my reading. So just fantastic book. Highly, highly, highly recommend. That one or Sister Outsider, I think both contain mostly the same content. So there's that. Another book that I read and loved this year was Tales from the Inner City by Shaun. So I discovered Shaun writing last year when I read Tales from Outer Suburbia, which was a short story collection that's illustrated by Shaun and written by Shaun, which was just like really quirky and cute and really short, great to like gift somebody. And this is like the older brother of that book. It is so much more, first of all, long. It's so much more epic. Like, there's so many incredible illustrations, so many incredible stories, just as weird and fantastic as I've come to expect from Shaun writing. And I cannot recommend this book enough. So to give you a little preview of what kind of thing we're talking about, it is basically a short story collection, and where every short story has something to do with a specific animal. So the contents page is these like different animals with numbers in their silhouettes, and it's like absolutely stunning, so beautiful. And every story also has something to do with a human interaction or a civilization's interaction or an urban landscape's interaction with these animals. So one of my favorite stories. It's more of a poem all about dogs and their relationship to humans, and it is absolutely stunning, and I genuinely cried reading that one. There was also some fantastic stories about alligators and some really interesting ones about fish. That's the kind of similar to the cover story. There are some about how pigeons were like business people and they took over the whole stock market, and nobody realized that the pigeons were running the stock markets. And it was just so funny and so joyful, but also so intense and profound, and like lifted up so much by Shaun's fantastic illustrations. Just such a good book, and I've not heard anybody talk about it, and I highly recommend it. It's a bit on the pricier side, but it's so worth it, and I bet you can find it secondhand somewhere, so do check it out. Yeah. Another one of my favorite books, and people are gonna think I'm like messing with them, and I swear I'm not, but like one of my favorite books this year was a German children's story called Anders hat sich verlaufen. Wow, what a fantastic book. This was such a joyful read for me. I discovered the book in a German book exchange when I went to Germany right before the first lockdown, and I just have such fond memories of like sitting in bed, like reading it with my boyfriend every night, and learning German through reading this book. So it definitely holds like a nostalgic place in my heart, but it genuinely is also like such a good story. Like it's about this little boy called Anders who goes out looking for the spring. It's still full on winter, but he sees the first sign of spring in his backyard, and he's like, I'm gonna go find it. I'm gonna go find the spring. And then he goes off on an adventure. He gets into a lot of trouble, and it's so good. The illustrations remind me of like Roald Dahl and all of the stories I read of Roald Dahl, illustrated by Quentin Blake when I was younger, and just so fantastic. It's part of a series called Ich lese selber, so if you wanted to find it online, and I think the author or the illustrator is called Wolfram Hänel, so I'll leave the name in the full description because I can't remember it right now, but it's genuinely one of my favorite books this year. Another book that I read and loved this year was On Poetry by Glynn Maxwell. I've already mentioned it briefly in a Q&A video I did, but it's worth mentioning again. It is genuinely one of the best books I have ever read on poetry. Like, wow. Glynn Maxwell is such a good writer. He's a practicing poet, and the book is written as if it's one long epic poem, genuinely, but it's also so informative. If you enjoy poetry, I would highly recommend picking it up. You will love the writing style of this book, even though it's a nonfiction and it kind of describes like all of these different elements of poetry, like form and structure and the history of poetry and rhythm and meter and all of this stuff. It's written in such a way that it kind of just takes you by the hand and takes you on an adventure, and I was stunned. My jaw, my heart, my whole body dropped reading this book. It was such a beautiful ode to poetry and its power, really, to take embodied experience and really manifest it in a visual, auditory, and linguistic way. I think if you are just getting into poetry, give it a try. I don't know if it's really super accessible for beginners, but it can really help guide you in understanding like how certain poems work and why certain poems have certain features. I really, really recommend it. It's such a good book, and I'm actually I was using it for one of my essays at university. I fully plan on rereading it. It's just like a beautiful resource that I wish I had picked this up earlier in my poetry journey, but I feel like I picked it up also at exactly the right time, so I'm not mad. But this was a fantastic book. I highly recommend it if you are into poetry or if you want to understand poetry further. Another nonfiction that I loved this year was Conscious by Annaka. I mentioned this in my very first wrap-up of the year, and it is just great. It is a very short philosophy book about consciousness and what it means, and it cites so many different scientific studies and philosophy papers, and explains and like walks you through, again, in a super accessible way. It walks you through all the different theories of consciousness, and it gives you Annaka Harris's perspective on it. It includes some of the more out there theories that also somehow tend to be like the theories that explain consciousness in the most coherent way somehow, which are like panpsychism, this idea that consciousness exists on every living being on a different level, in every cell possibly. So my plant would be considered conscious based on different criteria for consciousness. And given the fact that so the hard problem of consciousness is basically how do you get from like a material thing, like a book, and then end up with a living, thinking, breathing, creative thing, like a person, and where does it start and stop, and like how can we explain that? And so panpsychism is one of the dominating theories about that, and Annaka Harris also mentions a lot of theories about how meditation can help us understand consciousness better, and she's a meditation teacher for children, which is just a super interesting perspective. And clearly it's just such a well-researched book. It's such a little nugget of knowledge, and it's so accessible. It's literally one of the most accessible philosophy books I've ever read, and it's a great introduction with a great bibliography that you can, further research based on. So if you're interested in philosophy of mind, I highly recommend Conscious by Annaka Harris, and I absolutely loved it. I also really recommend the audiobook because it is an experience listening to that, and I think Annaka Harris actually reads it herself, so I love it when that happens, and absolutely great. A fiction book that I read and loved this year was The Word for World is Forest by Ursula LeGuinn. Ursula LeGuinn is a really famous science fiction author, and The Word for World is Forest is a novella of hers as part of the Hänel cycle series, which also includes the more famous The Dispossessed. So I started reading The Dispossessed this year, but I didn't really get through it, but The Word for World is Forest I read first, and it was just absolutely fantastic. Like I said, it's a novella, so it's really short. It's like 120 pages. I read it in almost one sitting. It was so interesting. I love Ursula Le Guin's style. It's quite a slow burn. I mean, her style is quite slow burn, but this book was one of her faster paced books, and the world building, the world that she created was really fascinating and included so many elements of things that I enjoy, such as magical realism. So basically what this book is it's about a human colony on a planet called New Tahiti, and it's about the experience of the colonized and how they try to get their land back. And so this whole planet is made up of forest. You learn a lot about the experience of the natives on the planet and what forests mean to them. It's basically a commentary on the human relationship to nature, as well as the human desire to own things, to pillage, to colonize. And I think it was such a well done book, and it was so profound without being like extra. I don't know how to describe it, but it was just so well done in my opinion. And it was one of those books that was really concise. Like there wasn't a word in there that didn't need to be there. And yeah, like I said, it was really interesting from a magical realist perspective because some of the natives of the planet have a very interesting relationship to dreams. As always, there was a really interesting gender play in the world building and in the characters. And I say as always because Ursula Le Guin is like infamous for messing around with genders and messing around with ideas of culture and language, and it was just so well done. So I highly recommend that book, and it was one of my favorites for sure of this year. And finally, a book that I'm reading right now, and just like a few honorable mentions of books that I loved, but they didn't make it into my top favorites, but I still would encourage you to pick them up. I'm currently reading A Beautifully Foolish Endeavor by Hank Green, which is the sequel to An Absolutely Remarkable Thing by Hank Green, and oh my gosh, it is so much better than the first one in my opinion. Like, it literally takes an amazing concept, an amazing book, and it just elevates it to an even higher level, which I didn't think was possible. I am so in awe. I love that book. It is a really fast-paced sci-fi adventure thriller kind of thing, and it's just so well done, and I love it. Another book that I'm currently reading, and I'm hoping that the book club will vote for this book at some point this year, is Factfulness by Hans and Anna and Rosling, I think, which is a book about facts and how the world is actually getting better, and how we can look at the facts and look at statistics in a way to really show ourselves that, yeah, like the world is getting better. It's not just a complete shithole, which after 2020, like that's what we need in life. We need positive energy. So there's that one. And I'm also reading 21 Lessons from the 21st Century by Yuval Harrari, the author of Sapiens and Homo Deus, which is also just such a fantastic book. And I'm listening to the audiobook. It's like 17 hours. It's insanely long, but it's so good. I cannot like praise it enough. It's so interesting, and I love his perspective. It's a bit long-winded, but overall a great read. And I'm just looking at my bookshelf. Is there anything else that was just really fantastic this year I want to mention? Definitely all the books that we read as a book club. They were, with the exception probably of We Are the Weather by Jonathan Safran Foer, like all the other books we read were really great. I learned so much this year thanks to the discussions we had as a book club, and thanks to the books that you picked, and it was like such a fantastic way to be held accountable to read interesting stuff, but also to have a space where we could talk about it and talk about what we don't understand and learn from each other's perspectives. So reading How to Be an Anti-Racist with you, and reading Democracy in Its Crisis with you, and reading Post-Truth, and reading Brave New Words, even to some extent We Are the Weather, like they were all just really fun times and really fun memories for me of a reading year that was just so strange and so difficult to get through. But yeah, that's it. Those are my favorite books of 2020. I hope you enjoyed this video, and please let me know what your favorite books of the year were. I would love to get some recommendations. Although, as I mentioned, I am not allowed to buy any new books, but do let me know about the books. I still love hearing about books and talking about books, so do leave them in the comments. And thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much for sticking around, and thank you so much for 2,000 subscribers. Oh my gosh, it's such a big number, and I cannot believe it, and I'm so grateful to each and every one of you. And yeah, if you haven't already seen, I've also released my 2021 goals video, where I just ramble on about how to goal set and what my personal goals are. So if you're interested in watching that one, do check it out. And I don't know when I'm going to see you next, but I hope it's soon, and I hope that you are very safe and well, and you have a beautiful start to a new year that will hopefully be better than the last. Lots of love. Bye.